Got it.
So, good evening, did it? Well, it is a good evening at this point in
Mm.
time to Dean Burnett, who is a neuroscientist. And I'm going to do proper hashtag full on, absolutely knows more than I do when I'm
Well,
trying to
we'll see.
communicate. When I'm trying to communicate behaviors and patterns and things like that. Now, one of the reasons I've asked Dean on is because A, he has a book which every young person should be reading and every parent should be buying for the young person and reading so they can have a conversation with the young person. Because the books that I write are slightly different. Mine are generally about the why we do the things that we do and how to help as a parent, but yours is really helpful from a slightly different perspective.
Mm.
And you were recently on a Sunday morning television program on BBC,
Hmm.
which has resulted in us having a conversation before we've even started today
Hmm. Did
on
it.
smartphones. But first, Dean, before we get to that, do you want
Yep.
to talk about your new book? So
Yes, that's
it's
probably a good
one
start.
of many, one of many,
Hmm.
and this is so when did this come out? It's about a month, a couple of weeks.
Yeah, September 19th. So time recording just over a month. So it's
Okay.
still fresh. No, the pages are still warm. They just come off the printer. So
Yes.
if you get there now, you get the nice warmth, like a fresh roll.
Well, in that case, oh yes, and I do need to let people know you have an extremely good sense of humor, being
Well,
being
a sense of
somebody.
humor.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of it is, I think, I would say, whether the audience likes it or not, Dean. There's going to be jokes in here that will be probably reflected back to being a parent, being a scientist, understanding really difficult concepts, and then trying to communicate that in a way that makes sense. So, would you
Mm.
like to take us through your book, not the entirety, because I mean,
Yeah.
unless you're a fast reader.
Basically, the new book is Why Your Parents Are Hung Up on Your Phone and What to Do About It, sequel to my previous first children's book, Why Your Parents Are Driving You Up the Wall and What to Do About It. The original concept for the first book was someone else, like my editor at the time, came to me with it was his idea, but he had no ability to write it. He said, "What about a parenting book? Because there's loads of those, but one for the teens about why their
Hmm.
parents are being a pain. Because that just isn't something you ever see, really." And I thought, I love that idea. Okay. So I wrote it and it went really well. It turns out that
Yeah,
was a very, still very popular, still an Amazon bestseller right now, 5 years later, which is always lovely, of course.
and very true because parents. Uh, mm, just be careful what you say here, Kath. Just retract that back because that was not thinking before I said it. Parents are massively anxious in most cases, and we can relate that to the other books that we'll probably talk
Mm,
about and where we'll go. But
yes, absolutely.
parents do sometimes, especially with the ages of about 12 upwards, get really, really in the face of young people without understanding what it is that's going on. So it's a really
Yeah.
important book. And of course, now the conversation is about these things that, because allegedly it's only the smartphones that are causing any form of crisis at the moment.
Oh, of course, yeah. That's the current problem. Everything was perfect before smartphones. There was never
Hmm.
any issue of any complaints about teenagers and new technology at all. If you look in the book, it's got that quote from Socrates: "The young people will lose their memories because they will learn to rely on external marks and never commit anything down." He was complaining about the invention of writing, actual like
Hmm.
pen on
Well,
paper.
it's been the death of us.
Yeah, yeah, totally. You can argue that since they invented writing, it's all been downhill since then. But that's it. We have a different approach to that now. But that was very much a new thing. Oh no, it'll hurt the kids. Is human nature, it seems. But
Yeah.
yes, so like, the first book went really well. There was talk of, oh, how are we going to follow this up? And again, that was 2019, and I think since then we've had a pandemic. We've had a lot of cultural movement, and the
Hmm.
issue of smartphones and how they're affecting the kids has become far more prominent than it was before. I touched it in the first book, but
Yeah.
it's become much more of a mainstream discussion than it ever was. And I think that deserves some. I thought that deserves some attention because so much of the discourse, the mainstream discourse, is very much parents telling other parents why they should be worried and how we should rein these kids in with their
Hmm.
devices. And I don't think that's a healthy approach. Again, I'm very much pro involving the young people in the discussion. Again, my first book, I do have personal memories of this being a teenager. Like I was a swotty kid, believe it or not, the current day neuroscientist.
Hmm.
But okay, I'm from like a very strong working class background, Welsh Valley pub I grew up in, or Mining Valley, so not the most affluent or academically inclined area. So I was a bit of an anomaly then. And do my A levels, of course, constant reminders and pressure from adults and parents and politicians and people in the news saying, no, it's vitally important that you get good exam results. Otherwise, you are essentially doomed.
Yep.
That's basically what their message was again and again for months on end. So did my exams to my A levels, and the news broke the day of the results. Like, oh, it's record high marks. Like 90% of kids have A to C. So this is like the best that we've ever seen. And within minutes on the news, as I was watching, the first thing was a politician saying, "Well, it just shows that exams are too easy now, aren't they?" So, yeah, it's
Yeah.
like the idea that kids could be at all competent or listen to what they're being told or are aware of the words pressures, that never occurs to anyone. It's like they are wrong. They're definitely wrong. We need to find out. We just need to figure out how or why. And that, I don't know. I think that's such an unhelpful approach. And it's very present in the debate on phones, and I wanted to sort of address that and involve the kids in the discussion for once. And that's what the book's about. It's a science-based approach to the phone issue, essentially, and all the different things that happens with it.
So already you're coming in with swear words here, Dean, in terms of science. Why would we look to science? I mean, I've got, and I will certainly say that young people in my office, when it comes to exams now, are getting younger and younger and younger in terms of that pressure and that phrasing actually around it's just too easy and exams have just got easier. And what we need to do is give them more pressure, more GCSEs, more exams, and really create the narrative that if you don't achieve X by this stage, that's it. You might as well just, I don't know, put your slippers under the bed, hang your dressing gown up, and that's it. Done. You might as well go into retirement age 16 now.
Yeah, totally. And it's this idea that teenagers and young kids are completely oblivious to all this happening, all this being said about them, because like the powers that be don't involve them in the conversation. It's sort of like assume that they aren't even aware of it, and that is so incorrect. I think no,
Yep.
they're all on TikTok now, and so well, but TikTok is showing stuff from the news and opinions and stuff, and they discuss things. They are intelligent, individual, capable humans with insight and awareness. And like that's why does this idea that they can just be corralled? Like I sort of think the main discussion point is like they treat teenagers and stuff not as individuals with thoughts and something to contribute, but like a mindless obstacle, like cows on the motorway. Like you just got to coax them off. Like they don't know what they're doing, but they are getting in the way. So let's just so yes, I'm very opposed to that attitude generally, and it's despite its omnipresence or because of.
Now you see now this will show my age actually. The image that went through my head is this is down to Harry Enfield and Paul Whitehouse with their
right.
kind of like, that's how, I mean, that is how teenagers are shown, isn't it? And I remember the sketch was Kevin turned 13.
Yes.
And that's when
very
everything
famous sketch,
that's when everything changed and he couldn't speak and couldn't communicate with the family, dressed differently, suddenly had got spots, and then they become this alien in your home and nobody knows how to talk to them. And what you're really kind of talking about here is, and this is the issue we're facing at the moment with the way that the finger has been pointed. Now, I'm just going to say, before we get on to going a little bit deeper in your book, there is also a book that's done that finger pointing for us. And I suspect people like you and I and people who rely on science across the board are trying to now counteract some of that narrative around there. So
I wonder what book you're talking about. Yes, go on.
Well, I mean, the direction that we're going in is, and I know you've done a little bit about the anxious generation is not the children, it's actually the parents, which is that idea of, so I've called them the health and safety generation, which began way, way, way before all of this tech. We need signs now to tell us not to fall in a hole. So,
that is obviously a real thing, yes, in terms of the idea of excess safety does feed into this a bit. So yes.
Yeah, which is kind of where I see a lot of this all began in terms of once upon a time, again showing my age, the kind of equipment you'd find in a playground was highly dangerous. And yes, it would be used inappropriately. Absolutely. That's what made it risky and fun. But what I do here, and I actually like this in some of the other writings that you've done in terms of your other books. By the way, I'll put the link to them all below because Dean has written more books than I have. Is this idea, where was I going with that? Yes, it's this idea of when we are talking about young people now, there is this narrative about they don't know how to take risks. They don't know how to think for themselves. They don't know how to do almost anything. So that's been blamed on said phones, and your book takes us through the journey. So for anybody who hasn't even been to Amazon yet and had a look, because generally people podcast and while they're doing it, they're on the other apps, aren't they?
Mhm.
So I would have expected that by now somebody's read in the show notes and they're maybe Googling or having a look on Amazon at what the book says, and it will give you an introduction.
Mhm.
But how would you really describe why parents are so hung up about these things? What is it that's caused this? Why did you even need to write the book?
Yeah, it's a common phenomenon. It's like new thing arrives in the world. Parents get overly concerned about how it'll affect their children. Like I said, with Socrates and writing an example, but the book lists several others. The invention of the printing press was believed to be the harbinger of the end of days, because kids will just read all the time. They don't need to remember anything. They'll ruin their brains. There's quotes in the book from like medical professionals arguing against the introduction of compulsory schooling because it's enforced imprisonment and it's like mental torture, making them learn all this stuff. That'll be terrible for the children. So it is a common phenomenon, and the book explains why that is. Just because of how our brains work. When you're
Hmm.
adult, there's a thing called the fading affect bias, whereby negative memories are stronger at first, but they fade a lot faster. So you've got the information, but not the feeling. So you just remember a thing happened, which at the time I thought was bad, but now I don't care. Time heals all wounds. That's a thing that occurs. Positive memories don't fade so fast. So like, treasured memories will stay and make you happy for longer. So the further back your memories go, further back in time, your memories were created, that the further back you go, the more positive they tend to be because there's been more time for the negative to fade. So when you're an
Hmm.
adult or a parent, think back to your childhood, your memories are overwhelmingly positive, even though at the time you would not have agreed. You spoke to your child self, your adults say, "You having a lovely times?" No, this is awful.
I hate
Because
it.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So many adults now think like, because these kids, they've got their phones, they're so slow. They see all this bad stuff happening in the world. Like, it's bad for them, but we never had that. And I'm thinking, but I know my parents and like even me to a certain extent, we grew up under the threat of imminent nuclear war for years on end. And
Absolutely.
that was quite stressful, That wasn't exactly the most helpful thing. And constant warnings that you're going to die in quicksand or an abandoned fridge. I mean, that really is that.
Now that's really funny because that's in The Iron Giant. It's in one of the Indiana Jones movies. We still haven't moved away from it.
No, quicksand seems to be a sort of perennial danger which no one's ever encountered. I have a
Ah,
similar concern about this whole bit of information. If you're ever attacked by a shark, punch you on the nose. Like, has anyone put that into practice? Because that sounds like a sort of if you've been attacked by a shark, expose more limbs to it. That seems like a bad idea. And also, you're in water. How hard are you going to hit it?
yeah,
That's
don't
a pers
splash. Don't
Yeah,
splash. There
that's a
we are.
personal bugbear of that one. So I don't think anyone's tested that. I don't think that's
Right.
a thing. Which is
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So some of the these are golden moments. Actually, just going back to the fading affect, this is why women can have children, and kind of
Yes,
B,
actually, I believe that. I
um
think that is a
uh,
real theory.
but also Dean, right? This is the comment that I hear most commonly in the office when I'm talking about. So obviously I work with children who have trauma, and quite often when I'm talking to the parents, I will either be told that's not traumatic, well, being smacked didn't affect me, and look how I've turned out. The fact that I'm now engaging in this type of behaviour and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
So actually, what you're talking about there has real life implications when you
absolutely.
take.
Yeah.
So this is kind of where I'm going to go with this now. This is where we're sitting at the moment when we hear a little bit of science, because you did mention medical professionals. So I'm going to come to that
Mm.
actually. The medical professionals that start to come up with terms that they might have heard in and around technology, a little bit about the brain, a little bit about motivation, a little bit about behavior, a little bit about psychology, and suddenly everyone in the world's an armchair expert. And then
Hmm.
in your book, you're really talking to the young people about, well, maybe your parents just have amnesia and they can't remember what it was like to be a child. And really, what I'm doing here for you is explaining to you why they're so stuck in this space at the minute. And actually, here's what the science says. Here's what big data, and that's a word that I want to focus on as well as we go through. So sorry, I've
Mm.
come charging in with my
No, it's all good.
my reflection there. So yeah, so to begin with, you've really started to talk to young people in the way that says this is really what's going on for them. So this is a new thing, and here's how to understand why they're doing what they're doing. So
Mm.
actually, you're doing reverse neuroscience on instead of reverse psychology.
I suppose, yeah, could phrase it that way. That's I'll have to go with it. It's but yes, I think it's an important thing, and I think that's goes back to something I said earlier on. This idea that kids and teens just don't have any insight or understanding about this stuff. They absolutely
Hmm.
do. They
Hmm.
can easily, understand stuff. They may not have the life experience or like the advanced jargon that an adult who spent more time in this world has, but the concepts are you can convey these things. Like I think it's important, well, for me at least, to trust the reader, no matter how old they are. Because like I got my son, he's 12, he's incredibly switched on and insightful, and so are most are all his friends. They're the most reasonable, measured, and calm and neutral conversations I've had about phones and tech. I've been with the teenagers and
Yeah.
the young kids who I researched this book but spoke to went into schools and stuff with permission. I was just wandering. That's not allowed.
Okay, well, yeah. Well, let's not.
Yeah, for a 42-year-old bald man, that doesn't look great, does it? But like but it's also it actually reflects back to the question you think you brought up just now. The whole adults are so, adult parents, older parents are so like preoccupied with the phones. It's not like I try to be fair in the book because like parents, the majority of parents that we're talking to and about have absolutely the best intentions.
Hmm.
In their mind, I had a nice childhood. It looks like my kid isn't having as nice a childhood, and that's my responsibility to do something about that. I know, like there's something happening to my kid. They're not having a great time. They're struggling, and that's bad. And I'm a parent. They're the most important thing to me. I want to do something about it. That's like totally natural human impulse. It's a
Hmm.
really good impulse. It's the reason we survived as a species. Totally
Yeah.
understandable, and that is to be applauded. But because the way the brain works, it doesn't give you the correct answers. And like we have this fade and affect bias. We think our childhood wasn't as good, whereas, but even then, like your childhood as an adult is when your worldview formed. Like your understanding of the world is based on things that happened to you during youth and adolescence. Then you're an
Hmm.
adult, like okay, like
Yeah.
the brain goes, okay, so there's no sort of fixed maturing point, but it goes right. I've got enough information as to how the world works, and it works like this, and I'm going to use this model to navigate life and make my decisions, and I'll update it and tweak it and stuff. But of course, what we have now is a very unique situation in human history, and hopefully it will never happen again. Because if it does happen again, it suggests societal collapse has happened at some point. But we have digital immigrants, is what we call like adults our age and older, people who were born without the internet, and then the internet came along at some point. So we went from a non-digital world to the digital world. So obviously, the internet was such a transformative thing to happen. So we grew up without it, and everything which involves the internet is just trying to
Yeah.
update our model of the world. Whereas
Hmm.
the modern child and teen grew up with it and smartphones and all that goes with it, and therefore it's not weird to them. They have a totally different perspective on it. Like I told my son, when I was your age, we had no internet. And he looked at me as if I'd said, when I was your age, we had no trees. What?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not possible. But by the same token, like modern child, modern teen isn't that preoccupied with their phone in terms of like what it means, what it's doing, as adults are. Like you talk to a kid about their phone, they talk a bit like saying they think of it as like a toaster. It's just something you have, You don't get many adults saying like, "Oh, have you heard about the latest toaster news?" Or like, "Oh, are toasters
I,
harming society?" Like that's not a thing that happens. Just like it's just a toaster. It's there. It's just something and they sort of feel the same way about phones all the time. Obviously, phones are far more omnipresent and do more stuff, but then
hmm.
because they do so much, like they actually offer so many different things. Then that's when the concerns arise and stuff. So, yeah, so
Okay.
you have totally different perspectives, and that's where a lot of the friction comes in, I suppose.
So that is definitely, I know it's true because obviously you've written about it. So I'm just aware that what I was about to say was very much about being biased in terms of sharing within your echo chamber there for a moment, Dean. But there is something about this is also what parents say about, back in my day, we never had in terms of the
Mm,
mental health issues. We never had depression. We never had anxiety. We never had sexual abuse. And quite
mm,
often I find that it gets compared to things that we know about. For example, now this is I'll just have to be careful so I don't get struck off on YouTube or anything like that. But there
mm,
is this, we didn't have sexual abuse in the 1960s and 70s and 80s until it came out in the news about a particular DJ that had white hair. I will leave it that
mm-hmm.
way.
Hmm.
And that's when we start to go back and we have the conversations. And right now, one of the conversations that takes place about technology in my therapy office are quite often the Netflix shows. So the current one that's being discussed at the moment is the Menendez brothers, which
Okay.
kind of refers back to the sexual abuse of the time in which they
Right. Right. Yeah.
committed a double murder. And what I tend to find with the young people is they'll say things like, but, my parents will say, but, we didn't have it back then. And what you're kind of talking about is the same thing. And it is that fading affect bias. I'm just thinking there's so many biases here, actually, in terms of
Mm.
human beings and their brains and the things that they do. But if I pinpoint on the mental health thing, now I have had Pete Etchells on. So this will be, if you don't know where I'm going with some of this, go look at Pete Etchells' episode and book. But where do you think this idea of parents not understanding teens and these things and the influence of mental health issues and we're going to go for it now, and the word addiction.
Mm. Yes, that's a very current thing. Well, again, from my research from the kids I've spoken to and stuff, one of the most irritating things adults say to them is the whole back in my day thing, as in, because even though it's meant as a sort of, well, I've experienced this and you experienced this. From the adult, I'm
Mhm.
sure it's a very neutral thing from the adult perspective, but from the child perspective, it's very tantamount to saying, back in my day, which was better than yours, it's very much a sort of a it was it, and B, what are you going to do about that? Like this isn't your day. This is my day. I'm alive. We're alive now. Like what exactly is this? Like
Mhm.
we've seen what happens when too many adults long for the past, which isn't with false recollections, as certain referendum showed us. But it's
Uh-huh.
there
We're
is look
both
there
being
is
very we're both being very diplomatic.
well, of course, yes. It's like apparently I work for the BBC now. I'm told it's like I've been recruited to the aunties masses. But yeah. So, but that whole thing of like, see, we do sort of downplay the bad stuff from our past because our brains do
Yeah.
that. But the whole notion like we didn't have this in my day, we didn't have this in the past. I mean, one of my favorite
Mhm.
series of books is Spike Milligan's War Diaries, World War II,
Yeah.
which he describes camps and camps full of quote bomb happy soldiers who are mentally unwell because they've been traumatized by the war.
Yep.
Thousands upon thousands. They formed the entertainment ranks. So Spike Milligan, the goons were like demobbed or war casualties because they were mentally disturbed by what had
Yes.
gone on. So clearly, the British Army at the time, not exactly the most liberal leaning facility in the world, not most progressive, was fully aware of the existence of mental health problems,
Hmm.
but it was not culturally the done thing to acknowledge that in like the wider world. So
Yeah.
we just didn't talk about these things. And the example I always use is that so we didn't have that in my day. No, no, well, it's like since the 1970s, we got a lot more photos from the surface of Mars. It was there the whole time. It didn't like probe landed. Oh, look, there's a planet here. It just called into existence because we looked at it. That was always there. It's always been going on. It's just that now we have both the language, the willingness, and the facility to recognize it and acknowledge it, which is something phones have like
Yep.
internet has helped.
Yep. Yep.
The whole mental health awareness campaigns are a big part of that. These things will have effect eventually. They have limitations. They have drawbacks in some cases, as we'll find out soon. But no, they will have an effect. So like young people can be fully aware of the existence of depression now. I mean, I started writing for the Guardian like 2012, was it something like that? Something ages ago, anyway. Um, and when I started writing it, I was like, I was just doing like the fluffy satirical science stuff at first, but I ended up veering heavily into the mental health stuff when Robin Williams passed away. That was
Hmm. Hmm.
an unexpected game changer, which is
Yeah.
I've mixed feelings about. But it wasn't that uncommon just before I started as a sort of a mainstream platform writer to see articles which were still depression isn't a thing. It's just attention seeking. It's just laziness or one of those.
Yeah.
That was still part of the mainstream discourse, and it wasn't long before that stopped happening. It was now, well, yeah, it's a thing, but it's not as bad as you say. And then it's become, yeah, it's a thing, but antidepressants aren't real like that. It's very much that argument has
Yes.
been
Yeah.
we're not in a great place with it, but the debate around whether depression is even real, if it still happens, it happens on the fringes. It's not a mainstream position anymore you can get away with, which is progress. And but it's recent progress. And until when all these discussions start happening in public, you people were tempted to be quiet about things, to be sort of, just don't mention it, because you never knew what was going to happen. Now you can reach out and find a supportive community or resources, which is better than it used to
Yeah, yeah,
be.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. And
so that's something.
yeah, that's one of the things. So I'm just thinking about one of the comments you made on BBC actually, in terms of this removal. Now, this is something I addressed in terms of the self-harm debate, and we're not here to talk about that in terms of our conversation. But if we take away these said smartphones for mental health betterment, let's call it that, then actually what we might be doing is by proxy causing a side effect that actually creates more mental health issues for young people who are vulnerable. And I wanted to really get your thoughts on this this approach that is taking place at the moment, that if we ban smartphones, I did notice actually that really it was Natasha Devon who had probably the better discourse with you in terms of concordant concourse. Where was I
Yeah, she was
going
on
with
my
that? I
side.
don't know. That was a good spoonerism. I'm just paying
Yeah, yeah,
attention to my own brain,
yeah.
but anyway, the better discourse with you, all that, because she was coming from a perspective around mental health and being a mental health campaigner. But actually, a lot of that mental health campaigning stuff and the activistic stuff that she's done has been on social media and has been in light of the positives that we now know about the spaces of LGBTQIA, plus spaces where people might be vulnerable. And a lot of the kids I work with are vulnerable in the offline world. And so the way that they find friendships, interpersonal regulation is through this space. So what are your thoughts in terms of this? Let's call it the how have I seen it prescribed and described? Probably the overuse of therapy language in the space of social media and in the media, in terms of everybody's got a label now, haven't they? And everybody understands
Yeah,
everything in terms of mental health. So what's been the
yeah.
trajectory for you in terms of writing for The Guardian? I know that's not what we discussed we were going to talk about, but it's just
No,
popped
no.
in my head.
No, of course. I actually did write about this in The Guardian a couple of times, I think, before they shut the blog network down because someone used the wrong photo once. I don't know. There were lots of different reasons why it happened, but apparently it wasn't my fault. I was told that a lot, which is nice. Um, yeah, I've always like at first I was very pro the mental health awareness campaigns just by default. And I still am.
Hmm.
I'm still very much pro those things. I don't know. I do think it's very essential, necessary. We're nowhere near at the end point yet. Like there's still loads of
Hmm.
uh, work and learning to be done, and we don't understand them just as a society yet. So there's loads more to do. But we are seeing some positive progressive steps and changes in the mental health
Hmm.
discourse. So that's good.
Hmm.
But I've also written about like sort of it boils down to like, a little knowledge goes a long way. And when you have awareness, you don't necessarily have understanding. And I think that's a
Yes.
crucial
Oh,
dividing
just
line.
say that I will clip.
Okay, good. But basically, because although as well-meaning as they are, most mental health awareness campaigns can essentially be boiled down to depression is real, pass it on. Okay, so when
Hmm.
you see if someone is told that, because okay, depression's a real thing, and like it doesn't mean you do anything about it. It doesn't mean you do any sort of reflection on it. It's okay, I guess that's real, and then that doesn't necessarily lead to change or help or advancement. So I think, yeah, and the understanding, like I said, like I appreciate that my Wi-Fi is real. I do not know how it works. The only time I'll look into it is when it stops working, which is
Yep.
how mental health tends to work. Like
Yep.
when your own goes awry, I should look into this, or at least you would hopefully, because mental health issues are a different thing altogether, aren't they? Insight can be
Yep.
altered. So there is that, but then it's the armchair diagnosis. It's the sort of using therapy language where it is not required. I have said before that I really wish depression, the disorder, had a different name to depression, the general feeling like, oh, I am depressed. You can say that because you didn't get a promotion at work. You can say I am depressed because you've been clinically unable to leave your house for 6 months, and those should not have the same label, but they do. I know we have now
Mm.
general depressive disorder, so the clinical terms are worked into it. But yeah, I do. It's a language thing, so it's impossible to sort of enforce that. But No, I think it would help. We would benefit from different labels for that sort of thing. But I do approve of the fact that for a long time there was the the medical or disease model of mental health care, whereby basically
Yeah.
mental health was just suddenly just incorporated into the existing medical system, which exists as patient turns up, patient says what's wrong, doctor gives diagnosis, doctor tells them what to do, what medication, what intervention is needed,
Hmm.
patient does it, comes back, is or isn't better, repeat until necessary. In that case, it's very much doctor led. The medical professional is in
Yep.
charge. Like,
Yep.
you tell me your problems, I tell you the solution. You do the solution. Does it work? Yes or no? Then we eventually find a cure, and then you go away and hopefully don't come back because you're not ill anymore. But that's oversimplification. In like if you've got a virus or a broken leg or a ruptured organ, then yes, obviously you can't do much about that. The medical person is the one who has to do that. But that isn't how it works in mental problems more often than not, because the only one who
Hmm.
has any insight
Yeah.
into it, understanding of it, is you, the patient. So it should by necessity be a more two-way process, a more discussive process. And that sort of changed and shifted over time. So now that seems to be more, not perfectly, but it seems to be more adopted. But then, of course, you can go perhaps a bit too far where, because now we have phones and internet and social media platforms where people with mental health problems can share their insight, and they
Hmm.
absolutely should do that. They should be the ones leading the discussion. But because everyone's mental health problem is so subjective and so unique and so sort of complex, it's so, that combine that with the urge to be seen by as many people as possible, to help as many people as possible, that sets up, I think, an uncomfortable friction. Like, I have
Yeah.
had depression, I have had this disorder. Here's what you do about it, and I am an influencer now, and I can tell you all this stuff. And that might very well have worked for you. It doesn't necessarily work for everyone else,
Yep.
but it does set the precedent that you can say this and just spread the words out there rather readily. And then you get things like people diagnosing Donald Trump remotely. They're not psychiatrists. He's not their patient. They're not professionals. They haven't actually had an interview with him. They're saying,
Hmm.
he slurred this word once in a speech, so therefore he has brachio trauma, whatever. I've heard that word once. Now I know he's got that. Yeah, I've got that. So yeah, we do try to apply our knowledge to the world around us. And now that mental health knowledge is so much more common, people do that more. But it does serve to muddy the waters a lot. And, you get things like, I'm a little bit OCD. You're not. You're slightly fussy. You like things neat. You do not have a serious medical disorder, which brings us back to the earlier point you made. Also, like, we say, like, well, phones are addictive. No, no, they
Oh,
aren't. No, they aren't. As I was very, very willing to say, apparently, on live television in front of millions
you
yesterday, and
did. You did.
I'll do it again. I'll say
And
that.
there is a reason we are talking, and it's possibly because of conversations that have taken, I think, itty bitty bits all over social media. But I definitely wanted to address this idea of addiction. Now, the way that I perceive this word is I tend to put it into a particular space in terms of medicalized language. And
Hmm.
certainly in my role, it's psychopathological disorder diagnostic language. Whereas what you were talking to earlier, and I think I've kind of alluded to this in I'm a little bit this and I'm a little bit that, as though these disorders are something you can take a little bit from, have
Yeah,
it for a while, and then hand it back.
it's a sort of mental health buffet type thing.
It's
Yeah, just
well,
yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Today I'm going to I'm going to pick a different buffet. It's a little bit like the kind of space we're in at the moment with everything's a spectrum. Therefore, I get to
Hmm.
choose where I am on that spectrum, whereas that's not necessarily what we're
Yeah.
really thinking about here. So this pathological diagnosis of addiction is from a medical perspective initially. That's actually where it sits. Um, a lot of the distinction between what we're going to talk about now and where we sit does not even sit in the diagnostic manuals either. There is no
Hmm.
internet addiction. There is no, and
No.
there's a lot of this taking place at the moment in terms of people saying, oh, yes, but it is, it's gaming addiction or it's internet addiction or social media addiction. So let's go back to the how do you see or how do you even theorize around this word addiction in terms of how people are trying to have the conversation about smartphones? And then can we have a conversation about why they're not, please?
Yes, I'm more than happy to do that. And so like you might want to make some tea or something because this
I'm
could
just
take
going
a
to
few
sit back. I'm going to
minutes.
sit back
Yeah.
now. And
Yeah.
this was what I brought you on for, Dean,
Yeah.
because this is, I've said it,
Mm.
and I'm a psychotherapist. The reason you're here is because you're the neuroscientist.
Right.
You hold a qualification.
Yeah, I think I'm reliably informed there's more than one, but I'll take that title. You know,
Hmm.
if no one's using it, I'll be the neuroscientist.
The
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
The one and only. We found him finally. He's been in a shed this entire time. It's first and foremost, like this is something I actually did cover in a different book, psychological, 2 words, very clever, science of mental health.
Hmm.
There's a whole chapter about addiction in that because I do feel it is in essence a microcosm of the sort of general understanding of mental health in the world as it is. The stigma, the medicalization, the diagnosis, the treatment, the individual
Yeah.
characters, and so on. So addiction's a really important word anyway in the medical field, and a very storied one, a very historied one. There was a period of many years when the medical community voted to not use addiction anymore, to like drop it as a label. I think it was the World Health Organization or someone high up, one of the big organizations which is in charge of these things, and the movement, the proposal to drop addiction passed by one vote, so it was a very, very fraught subject. So they started calling it dependence instead. Now someone comes in, oh, they got drug
Yeah.
dependence, they're not addicted. Reason being, the thinking was that addiction is already such a heavily loaded, stigmatized word. If you tell someone you're addicted, you're an addict, they automatically feel much worse. They will not seek further help because obviously they don't want to be labeled further with this sort of thing. And so it's safer to not to not call them that, to say dependent instead, which caused further problems downstream because drug dependence is already a thing. It's a different thing to addiction. So basically you could be dependent on painkillers if you have chronic pain, which the painkillers are offsetting.
Absolutely.
Then you are dependent on that drug. You're not addicted because you need it to function. So as addicts do, but it's a different thing. Trust me, it's a different thing. But that
Yep.
meant people who were dependent on drugs were then not getting them because medics thought, oh, you're dependent. Well, that means addicted. I can't give you any more drugs. So we want to avoid that. And therefore, people suffered needlessly because of the lack of the word. They brought it back, addictive disorders. So there's lots of medical variations on it.
Yep.
But, already addiction as a label is a very, very important and powerful one. And as you said, it in the medical field is reserved for only a select few things. In the DSM, the American Psychiatric Association's list of all recognized mental health disorders, addiction's in there, obviously,
Yep.
several types. The only non-drug addiction or non-substance addiction is gambling. That's the only behavioral addiction which is recognized as a valid addiction, which requires intervention. It's actually one of the trickiest ones to cure for various other brain-related reasons, which I will go into in an upcoming article. To keep an eye out for that. So I've got that coming. So don't worry, that'll all be covered. But like you say, that doesn't recognize shopping addiction, phone addiction, video game addiction,
Nope.
internet
Nope.
addiction.
Nope.
There's all the whole like the concept of sex addiction comes up a lot, but that's not recognized either. That's
Nope.
that seems to be more of a media exercise to excuse the behavior of certain powerful people.
Yeah.
Yes, I, I imagine. There we go. Other opinions are available. Oh damn it! There's the BBC coming in again. Sorry.
I was going to say, and I rest my case, Your Honour.
Yeah.
It's like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but so yeah, so like, but as we saw on with the depression thing, addiction is now a mainstream term as well. It's a label, and it's used far more colloquially about stuff. Like we had an arcade in the pub growing up, and my mother would say, like, you're always on the arcade. Addicted to that arcade you are. She didn't mean you have a pathological disorder, which means you cannot stop playing the arcade game and you will sacrifice many aspects of your life and your priorities to play this arcade game, and you will willingly give up relationships and families, and it'll alter your thinking to the point where you are self-justifying playing this game. My mother wouldn't have said that anyway.
It's very articulate. It's very articulate, isn't it? In terms of what I'm actually saying is, you seem to be enjoying yourself, but we'll come back to that.
More than I'd like. Yes. So like it's become a word which just means you do that too much, or you do that more than I'd like. to a degree which I personally, subjectively feel is unhealthy. And that's sort of how it's treated a lot. And that's where it comes into the smartphone discussion, which I don't necessarily like, but I would be okay with if it's just stayed colloquially. But it's got to the point now where people are using the phrase or the language of children are addicted to their phones to inform actual policy, to inform, campaigns.
This
School
is scary.
rules. And like as we talked about just before the recent case, ongoing case in America, several US states are suing TikTok for presumably more political reasons. I'm not sure the behind the scenes there's lots going on, I'm sure. But according to the Guardian, again, these are US states, California, DC, not like Trumpland, especially like just trying to get some attention. These are the high up elite ones suing TikTok for being addictive, or making children addicted. And according to the actual case, the suit filed in language, it says it is bad because it induces dopamine in young children. And apparently that is something you should be sued for, according to this case. Which means that anyone who ever makes a child happy in any way, shape, or form is breaking the law, or should be sued for it. And that is quite a precedent.
I'm thinking here, Dean, right? At that point in time, I was motivated to ask you a question or have an emotional reaction. Therefore, in my understanding, that's a good point at which my brain would be created. Let's not get into the pathways here because that's really geeky. But in that moment, I had a squirt of dopamine because I was motivated to do something with the information I was hearing. And therefore, when I responded, I probably got a hit of dopamine as well. So I'm just going to take myself off because I'm clearly addicted to having a conversation.
Yeah, and I presume I'll be hearing from your lawyer because obviously I did that, and therefore I am a criminal.
I'm just thinking about the lawsuit that could follow, actually.
Yeah. I haven't sold as many books as you think, so you won't get much.
Just go easy.
Yeah. If you could, I have my own kids as well. So, but that's exactly it, though. Like, it's become so commonplace to say this. Like the woman with different opinions I was talking to on the BBC show, like, started off, and the host were fairly confident in saying phones are addictive. Addictive phones. We know this. This is a fact. Like that was like just set in the precedent. It wasn't. That wasn't meant to be discussed. It was just a case of, well, phones are addictive. We know that. Here's what we're going to do about that. And so that's why I said, no, they're not. That's not a thing. And which did seem to sort of wrong foot a lot of people. Oh, no. Hang on.
There was some interesting body language, I'll say that. But there's because actually the fact that they've said that is not a fact. In terms of, I mean, let's go down the route of the potato research, okay? As I keep calling it, and it's so in my yellow book, I've talked about we do have a thing in this country, right, in the UK, of really taking pieces of research and going, well, it's no more dangerous than a potato, or it's no more dangerous than falling off a horse. In terms of David Nutt's research around MDMA, but we do this a lot. One of the things we tend to do, and I'm just thinking here, is when we get the statistics, it's complicated for the public to understand. So there's a lot of what I'm calling rote regurgitation at the moment about somebody said it's addictive. We think that they're, and it's quoted often, I see on social media, addictive by design. Well, how can that be so if they're not addictive? So what is it that these organizations, countries and states and places are trying to fight against is something that doesn't even exist. So how can that even be a thing?
That's exactly my point. The American legal system is having to decide whether or not something is addictive based on American legal filings. Which is something the American Medical Association doesn't believe exists. So, that I would say that's a tricky argument to present, but it is like, it's so common now. It's become received wisdom, isn't it? It's an accepted fact, but it's not actually a fact. It's just been said so often that it's just agreed upon. So
could you give a neuroscience interpretation and explanation of why we do that? Because I'm well aware to kind of just come in with a probably a social commentation type thing there. Oh yes, it's because we're stupid, but I'll not say that.
No, don't. Well, don't say it again. It's already on the record. So it's again, it's common practice. It's not something people do even on purpose, I would say. the world around us is complex and getting more and more and more complex by the month, by the day, and the human brain does not like uncertainty.
Hmm.
It evolved to
Yeah, yeah,
uncertain
yeah.
things mean you don't know what's going to happen, which means something bad could happen. You can't prepare for it, which means it could kill you. Ergo, uncertainty is bad. I mean, that's sort of a very loose way of describing how the brain's sort of threat detection system works. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't like that. I must resolve that. And that's a good impulse. It's kept us alive as a species for millions of
Hmm.
years, so you can't really knock it for that. But it sort of makes more sense when you're in a sort of your life is moment by moment. You live in the wild. Like I'm alive right now. Predator, is it gone? Is it here? Gone. Okay, good. I'm hungry. Food? No food. I don't know. So when you're existing like moment to moment, you just like basic survival is all you're really concerned with mentally. It's a good model to have. But now we have these massive, hefty brains which can contemplate what ifs, like thousands of
Yeah.
them at any point.
Yep.
And you have to keep tracking multiple factors in a world which is becoming increasingly more complex. Which, let's be honest, is our fault. We made it that way, so that's a whole other thing. But so we do want answers. We want simple answers. We want that we can comprehend and just rely on. So when loads of adults are seeing their children constantly look at their phones, that's like strikes you as, oh, that's a wrong thing. I know how our childhood works. It doesn't look like that. And my kids are also being moody and snarky and like not answering back. Is it because they're becoming teenagers and that's what always happens? No, 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 no. It must be this thing, this
Yeah, yeah,
rectangle. That's
yeah,
what it
yeah, yeah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah, and but you want when you sort of think, well, what's happening to them? When you hear addiction, you think, oh, bad thing, which makes them want something, and it becomes so yeah, I know that works. So that it sort of fits nicely. It's a simple, straightforward way of understanding what's happening.
Hmm.
The only drawback is it's not happening. That isn't a correct explanation, but
Yeah.
it makes intuitive sense, which is always a killer when it comes to
Absolutely.
complex issues.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm thinking here, this is Daniel Kahneman's work, isn't it? This is like your type 1, type 2 errors that you might see in research, but actually this is the way that the brain works anyway. And
Hmm.
I've just been thinking actually that there might be a better way to explain this for myself, not for
Okay.
this is just my musing. This is external rumination between a whole society, isn't it? Well, it must be that thing, and
Hmm.
that thing must equal that. Therefore, cause equals that.
Yeah,
Point,
totally. Yeah.
point to smartphone. So if we remove said thing, problem solved.
Yeah. That is like sort of the main thinking of it. And again, I think within a whole group and society is a really important part of it as well, because it's something I mentioned on the show, but also something I mentioned elsewhere, which I do think is a hugely overlooked point. The whole discourse around phones, the whole like concerns, like the campaigns, the drive to have these bans and restrictions put into place is almost entirely, if not completely entirely, being led by concerned parents,
Yeah.
which is obvious. Of course it is. Parents are concerned, ergo, concerned parents are the ones pushing for these changes in rules, which makes sense. But by the very nature of it, then you've got loads of concerned parents talking to other concerned parents about the issues they all agree on, and then you get strong groupthink. You get very rapid
Hmm.
polarization, and people get sort of like caught up in it, and like you want to impress the other people in your group, so you become more militant about things, and that's just group dynamics anyway. That's how humans work
Yeah,
when they
yeah,
get
yeah,
together in one cohesive
yeah.
group. But the big problem I again try to flag up whenever I can is that although this is the entire push has been driven entirely by concerned parents, concerned well-meaning parents, whatever you think of the conclusions, they are well-meaning. That then completely ignores or like doesn't even consider the fact that not every parent is a concerned, well-meaning parent. There are far too many, as
Yeah,
you obviously know, for whom their child's well-being is not a priority, is not a big factor in their thinking, whatever form that takes. And what this leads to then is all these concerned parents saying we must ban and reduce the use of phones for under 16s or whoever because they might potentially be harmed by it in theory, according to our ruminations, at the expense of, like, there are countless children out there for whom this smartphone, the connections it offers, is a vital part of their life. Like they
absolutely.
cannot rely on their
Absolutely.
parents and their close family. They are the hazard in their life. And the idea of then bringing this rule to like, well, we should make sure that only parents can see what kids do on their phone. Like that would be like a terrible turn of events for so many children. Like children, even like even well-meaning parents, like they could be, you can be totally convinced that they actually definitely do want the best for their child. They care about them more than anything. And if that child turned to them and said, I think I might be gay, they would have an absolute meltdown. And that is just the sad reality of the world we live in.
Yeah.
And that's something smartphones provide for kids like that, like an outlet, a resource, a sense of connection. So basically the point is all this discourse is we need to prevent hypothetical bad things happening to our safe children. And in order to make that happen, we're going to make all very, very, very certain bad things happen to vulnerable children. And I don't think
Yeah.
that's an acceptable way to be honest. I don't think that's an acceptable system.
No, because it's the approach of my child matters, but yours doesn't. And
Yes.
and when you start to kind of deconstruct the whole process like that, I've found this whole thing really difficult from the outset. And I'm just going to go back to when I first started to write about the kind of technology and the technology words that we use. I see things like digital detox, digital dementia, digital parenting, digital, and I honestly, I don't know what some of these things mean. But again, what I find scary, really, is that this is being driven by people without that academic background. But what then happens is certain professions are recruited in. And I'll give you an example of this that I saw a psychologist say recently. I mean, the kids are at home and they just lack interpersonal skills. They're at home playing games online with their friends. And I sat there and thought, hang on, what? What?
Yeah.
Even the oxymoron in what you've just said has me do it, because a lot of the kids will say, wait, what? And I have
Yeah.
a lot of those moments in this entire discourse at the moment. I don't necessarily understand what's happening in terms of the way that it's being driven by the fear, but I totally understand where it's coming from, because I call it hysteria, actually. This has been driven by a finger pointing exercise that came from quite a moralistic perspective, which is, well, you gave them the things and now look.
Yeah.
And that's,
there's a big part of that. Yeah. A certain sense of responsibility for what's happening here. I know it's, a lot of parents can feel kind of powerless in that. I get that. I mean, you mentioned the book as well. It's part of the discussion. Some people say, well, if you're so scared about phones, why do you give them one? Well, it's not really that easy, is it? You can say you're not having a phone till you're 16 or 18. But if all their friends have one, if the world around them has one, then they have, they will be losing out. You will be actively doing them a disservice. You'll be harming your relationship by not getting them one. And that's,
yeah.
these are things you take into account when you're a parent. Like parenting is hard work. It's parenting a teenager is harder than anything.
You're not kidding.
No, that's exactly the problem. But it's when people sort of think, oh, this is hard. I need help. What if the government stepped in and made the decision for me? Like, that's very tempting out, but it's not really,
Yeah, that's
helpful
not,
one, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I jokingly refer to the big book of they. So the big book of they say,
Mm.
and in terms of that particular statement, there is this element of, but nobody told me it was going to be this difficult, and nobody told me that I was going to have these problems to deal with. And where is the book on this? Well, actually, you don't need to find a book now, because there's 3,000 voices on your Facebook feed that'll
Yeah.
tell you what you actually need to be doing and how you're getting it wrong. And I think what we've done over 27 years is create an anxious generation of people who are raising the next generation, right?
Yeah. That's
And
a big
that's
part of it.
happened.
Yeah.
It's certainly in terms of the adult. Oh, I mean, look at the kids. They're not getting the exam results. They don't know how to stay in a job anymore. They don't know this. They don't know that. They can't do this. They can't do that. You're rubbish at this. You're rubbish. It's just been non-stop for 27 years. And there is so much information out there that I don't think people know what's the right kind of information. And we've got into this space where even the debates around misinformation, which I find hilarious, which is misinformation you can definitely tell apart from real information, because we're the government telling you how you can detect
Yeah.
it. And I'm like, again, wait, what?
Yeah.
So how do we get scientific thinking, critical thinking? Because I don't know if it was on I don't think it was on the conversation you had, which was in order to get the change that we need, we all need to address critical thinking. This is happening in terms of elections and wars and things like that. We're not going to change the entire generation of human beings into critical thinkers all of a sudden. How do we get the thinking into this space? Because one of the things that was mentioned on the Sunday morning show that you were on was around parents don't have choices. So you were talking about, parents don't have choices. They have to buy their child one of these phones.
Mm.
But also, why are we having debates and bills and things happening at high levels where the biases are being taken up? Well, we're going to take it to Parliament because actually we think that this is the case, and we're as educated as those concerned parents. So how do we even get that? I don't know. Maybe that's even bigger question than you can answer. Put your
No.
BBC or Guardian head on, maybe.
No, it's a valid concern. Obviously, it's a much more like a broad spectrum one as well. In that, there's so much information out there now. How do you know what's what? And it's something I do sort of address in the book a bit for kids. Obviously, try to get in there where they can. When you're confronted with all this information, this world full of stuff, full of things, this internet full of claims and left, right, and centre, and all that sort of stuff. It's like a fire hose directed at your temporal lobes. It's really hard to process it all.
Mm-hmm.
When that happens, obviously your cognitive mind will have limited resources to filter through it all, got too many options. So what usually happens, like when the brain's confronted with loads of stuff, it'll default to what the emotions like. So like, here's a million things. I can't take all that in. So the emotions go, I like those four things. Okay, four I can do. Yes, that's good. Like those four
Mm-hmm.
things make me happy.
Mm-hmm.
These four things make me sad. These three things make me angry. Those are different emotional reactions, but they are things you can focus on. Like, oh, these are significant now because they have triggered an emotional response. And therefore you get people like going way down rabbit holes or getting completely caught up in objective nonsense because it makes them feel good. As in, I have this anxiety about something that happens in the world. Here is a theory or a model or a claim which says that I am right. Oof, I like that. That's a good emotional response. Let's get some dopamine going. And therefore, I like this. And I shall cling that is more significant. I shall
Yeah.
retain this information and ignore the rest. And that keeps happening because it's so much now. You can just be, algorithms take over, like groupthink takes over, then you just become immersed in everything you think is correct, which is where that certain book is so successful. I think just telling concerned parents you're right, and here are some big words to prove it. So that's a lot
Mm-hmm.
easier to convince people when you're telling them what they already want to hear, and add a few bits of jargon to it. It sounds clever, so therefore it must be true, and that's generally how it works, isn't it? So everyone wants a tiny bit of science. They don't want
Yes.
the actual science. It's I want a
Because
flavor. I don't want the
that's
call.
time consuming though, isn't it? That's one of the
Hmm.
things that humans choose to do is well, just give me the, I mean, I have this in therapy. Yeah, I don't want to do 20 sessions, Kat. I just want you to tell me what to do.
Yeah. Oh,
That's
I
not
want
how
the
this
easy answer.
works.
Yes. Not quite a therapy thing, that is it? So,
What you
one-stop
mean?
therapy shop isn't going to really take off, I think.
You see, well, that's where the conspiracy theory. You see, therapists are just prolonging the agony. They're taking
Of
people.
course they are,
I'm
yes.
here taking money from people because actually, it's not me that does the work.
Hmm.
But that's the thing, isn't it? It's time consuming, energy consuming. It means that you've got to dedicate thinking to that process. And actually, that book has done a real what do I want to say here? It's done a real number on coming in and giving quick solutions to a problem that's nuanced, multifaceted, complicated, and includes human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I'm sort of, I like to say my book is the opposite of the anti-anxious generation because it's
Hmm.
for kids, includes kids, mentions kids, and is science-based. But that's just me, I would say that. I'm not exactly impartial here. But, this does actually feed back into the whole issue we're talking about because if there are practical, workable solutions potentially to the issue of the problems kids have when it comes to smartphones. And again, at no point will I say they are completely problem free. There are plenty of potential negatives. Every child is different. Every phone offers
Hmm.
a multitude of things. So there are risks, there are dangers, there are hazards. There may not be addiction, but there is problematic behavior, excessive use, like bad habits forming. These are all things which are valid. And despite the accusations I've had when I say about this whole dopamine thing isn't, it's not addictive, like, oh, you're just trying to let social media companies off the hook. I'm not doing that. I'd say I'm doing the opposite because when you start saying social media is addictive, causes too much dopamine, they can easily disprove that. That is a claim which, if
Hmm.
you actually delved into it, they could just like say, well, no, we're not. Like, there's no evidence for that. This is how it worked, and that gives them an out which they do not need, or I'd rather they didn't have, because let's be
Mm.
honest, Social media companies are not our friends. They want our data, they want our attention, they want our clicks. And as a friend of mine, Tracy King, pointed out recently, if they could make social media addictive, I'm sure they would. I'm sure they'd
Oh,
be
if they
happy to
knew how
do.
to, of course they
Yeah,
would.
yeah,
In
yeah. Of course,
terms
like,
of,
this isn't something they've avoided doing out of the goodness of their hearts. It's just like it's not a thing at the moment. If they could figure out how to do
yes.
it, I don't doubt it. Then we have the addiction to him. Bring it in. That's absolutely fine. Um, but yeah, taking on social media companies and sort of regulating them properly and controlling like what children are exposed to via the source is a very, very big, hard job. Uh,
Yes.
Perhaps shouldn't be, but it is. And similar to like having a meaningful discussion with your teenager about proper smartphone use and like the intricacies and the do's and don'ts and what's healthy, what's not is a big job. Raising a teen is hard enough anyway. And especially when you're a parent who hasn't grown up with these things, you're supposed to lead the conversation about a subject matter which they are technically more aware of than you. That's daunting. That's very, worrying. How do I
Hmm.
do that? Am I going to do it wrong? So when you have this, your options are take on social media companies, stop them from doing stuff, regulate them properly. How do I even do that? That's beyond me as a single parent. Or like deal with it directly, like go through each individual thing with your team. They don't want to do that.
Hmm.
They resent me. That's a hard job too.
Yeah.
Then like if you just ban phones, that's easier, right? That sort of becomes, oh yeah, well, how about we just do that? That's a much easier thing. And
So
it becomes an easy option.
So, what do you think to now? I'm going to put it in as the delay option. So there's alternative. I mean, there's so many bloody campaign groups at the moment that some are against everything, some are against just the phone, some are against social
Hmm.
media. The bill that's going through at the moment wants to raise the legal age of internet. I don't even know what this bill is trying to achieve, by the way, in terms of
Hmm.
let's make the legal age of the internet 16 because at 16 suddenly all of your brain capacities let's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
even go let's not even
yeah,
go there
yeah.
for a minute.
Hmm. Hmm.
But what do you think about the idea of so I'm going to use a term from psychotherapy here about alloparenting is where it takes more than just the two biological parents to raise a child. And that
Hmm.
has been successful in nearly every single tribe, hunter-gatherer space.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's kind of how we've survived best. So how do we create an alloparenting approach alongside maybe delaying certain things? So I would say professionally, I agree with delaying some specific types of content, some
Hmm.
specific types of spaces, but I don't believe professionally in the abstinence or removal type models. And I don't believe in delay social media because it's a construct that you can't even describe, but we'll not get into the intricacies of that.
Hmm.
What's your opinion in terms of the other ways that we could do this?
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, I think there's a lot to be said for that. Delaying more gradual introduction to, the more mature sides of the internet, social media. I mean, like in the book, I say, like, I do have a big section about uh, pornography, which
Hmm.
is apparently quite rare. It's like people won't go near it, but I don't think you can have a book about phones and the internet for kids without mentioning it. It's like one of the main things, and it is like the genuinely this isn't good. This is genuine. We can talk about screen time and like how nebulous and pointless a phrase that is, but young, too young people be given access to unlimited internet sexual
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
content as bad. I will go on the record of that. Yeah, that's not good. You shouldn't do that because, like as I mentioned, the book, sexuality is a sort of a very powerful human drive, which young kids don't have any experience of until teens, and suddenly all these things come online. You have this big, highly charged but sort of blank canvas in your brain of like, I want sex. I don't know what that is, but I know I want it. And like what's the analogy I use in the book? Like if you like grew up in like 17th century English village and suddenly you really want pizza, like I don't know what that is. I've just but you start looking longingly at the tomatoes and the cheese. And, oh, I bet something I can do with that. And you just got this weird notion in
it's,
your head of
it's why KFC and Coke are so big.
well, exactly. It's something I want. I don't even know what it is, but I definitely want it. And it takes time. It should be a gradual process, and then suddenly being confronted with the most explicit stuff possible at a very young age, that skips many many important steps. So
Yeah, yeah,
yes, I
yeah.
do think it's important to do that. So yeah, there definitely is um, a wise approach to be had for like you're young, you can have the intake, you can have a phone, but we're going to keep you away from this until until you're likely to be ready because subjective. Everyone develops different times and rates and stuff. And there's also discussion we had like what social media is appropriate for young people. Like I think like my son's got Snapchat like all his friends have. I don't see what he's doing there because obviously it's private, it's his world and stuff, but he doesn't seem to have any sort of issues with regards to seeing or receiving anything explicit and so on. Most of his consumption seems to be around guys playing Fortnite on YouTube, and then he plays Fortnite for a bit. So it's fairly monotonous, his exposure to the screen stuff.
Well, that's
but
that's the reality, Dean, in terms of a lot of the young people are doing things that are monotonous and boring. It's just that the volume at which they're consuming is often the phrase used. The volume at which I'm going to change that because I don't agree with consuming, because we're not consuming social media. We're engaging in it.
Yeah.
But the viewing of those Fortnite videos is akin to, I had to wait as a young child for the computer magazine to come out so that I could work out what it was I was supposed to do in the next map of the game. And my options were limited to walk forward, pick up axe, drop axe, turn left, speak to Gandalf, kind of giving away the game I'm playing there. But
Yeah.
it was limited. And if I got stuck, I had to wait maybe a week or a month. Whereas now, you are bombarded with people who are absolute experts at it. You've got the esports generation. These young people are learning how to engage in a game at a rate that's much more, it's speedier in terms of the comprehension that they get. But just think about how long it takes to learn to play a game of football.
Yeah, no, it's totally that. Again, like, from that one, the sort of games have expanded as a result as well. Like something like Fortnite, it's not a set thing. It's a virtual playground. You can, I think that's why it's so popular. It's almost like every playground game we played made quote unquote real. You build stuff, you shoot stuff, you run stuff, you jump stuff, you put silly costumes on, you become a character. It's ticking a lot of boxes for your childhood. But that's just Fortnite. But yeah, I certainly see there being a lot of logic and reasonable outcomes to be had from a phased introduction to the internet stuff. I think in application would be the tricky part, because I think something like that is going to be very tricky unless you have complete buy-in from everyone. So like every parent have to say, well, yeah, we're going to do that, because if some kids have total access to all the internet and others don't, you've got an us and them, haves and have not situation, which is very, very significant when you're a teenager. Like that's them, they've got all the stuff. I don't have that. What the hell's that about? And that's
But the social injustice and the crime and all of the outcomes that would follow from the haves and haves not. Haven't we been doing that for centuries? Haven't we been kind of
totally
into
yeah, and we've been complaining about this entire time. I think phones have sort of reduced that a bit.
Oh no, sorry, that's fading affect bias. It was better in my days.
Yeah, but also yeah, basically again, we're dealing with teenagers here. And like when you start saying you can't have this because adults said no, I mean, you might as well just paint the target on it. Like, well, I absolutely want that now. And that sort of becomes self-defeating in a way, which again, I don't know how you square that circle. I'm sure there are ways to do it. Or like if you then we get into technological approaches and methods, which is where I have to drop out of the conversation because that's not my thing at all. But maybe there's a way to do it, maybe there isn't. I don't know how that sort of stuff works, but I can certainly see there being a benefit to a sort of staggered or a phased introduction to tech and internet stuff. I'm just not entirely sure how that would manifest based on our current abilities to create such a thing.
And the fact that children, I'm just thinking. So I'll give you an example. My children were quite young, and I say young as in like teenage years. And we'd had one of those evenings where I was like, right, that's it. You're not going on the Wi-Fi anymore. So I turned it off. Ha ha ha, thinking I'd won, as you do. Only to find out that I could hear one of my children laughing upstairs. And I was like, but they're in the bedroom. What are they laughing at? Can't be a book, because, books nowadays are not that funny, maybe, or whatever. I went upstairs and one of my children was using the internet. And I was like, how did you get on the internet? And he said, well, I just used next door's Wi-Fi.
Exactly. So that's another thing which I can totally understand parents being miffed about, that because of the way it works, young people are often better at technology than we are, because again, they've just immersed in it from day one and we're still playing catch up. So how do you sort of take control of a matter which you're not the expert in?
Now you see, I got asked And I have to be careful because I signed in it. I was at an event and I got asked on this stage, and I'm in front of this audience. Well, don't you think though it's really difficult, Kath, because like the parents are way behind on tech? And I said they might be, but they're way ahead in terms of being an adult, and they're way ahead in terms of having been through this process and succeeded, having reached adulthood, whether you've got a fully matured and coherent narrative in space of, where you are in your growth and development, let's call it. That's the thing that you've already done, and you're a parent and you can talk to other parents. So actually, what we tend to do is we tend to go, well, we don't understand the technology. There we are. It's almost like the addiction framing where we're disempowered, isn't it? Oh, it's an addiction, I can't help it. Oh, it's technology, Kath, I don't need to learn it because it's just, somebody else has to do it.
There's that, yeah. I mean, I'm sure that adults are, we are the adult ones. Again, like, I keep emphasizing in the book for the kids, like, yes, your parents might not make sense to you, but they are still the adults. They have been around a lot longer than you have, and they do know more stuff. You're going to have to just accept that as a fact, because it is just how humans work. I think my point was more about when you're like trying to get some handle on the situation with your kids' phones. Like I said, like, you're using it too much, you're doing this, or I don't think you should be doing that. Because, like I say, teenagers are smart people. They're insightful. They observe, they learn, they hear what you're saying, and they sort of take it in and understand. Anything that sort of makes it look like you don't know what you're talking about, do you? Is going to sort of count against you or make it harder in the sense that, okay, like you've had enough YouTube now. I'm not on YouTube. What do you mean? Like I'm on this is WhatsApp, is it? Oh, okay. We'll put that. No more of that then. Well, okay, this is Instagram, is it? So they can sort of like, well, why should you be in charge when you don't know what this is? And that's you can sort of see that being another sticking point of like the discourse between parents and teens.
Oh, and I definitely as a teenager would have used that. I would have used that
Absolutely, yeah.
thinking like, you don't even know what you're talking about. So,
Precisely,
that's in fact, that happens to so many teachers at the moment. I do know this is a thing that is going on with a lot of the young people is they'll come in and tell me that the teacher didn't even know what they were talking about. And so we get into the conversation and the teacher said, blah, 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 blah. In American history, this happened, or I don't know, one of the types of rocks in geography is being discussed. And they go, no, that's not right, miss. That's not right, sir. Because they've Googled it already, or they're Googling it, in part of their homework. And then they come in with and here's the list of things, or here's the list of things that show that you're incompetent. And that's one of the things that we didn't have to really cope that much with, unless, I don't know about you, because you did mention your kind of childhood. I would have been in encyclopedias and at the library in terms of trying to learn. And when you find that alternative viewpoint, you tend to bring it in doing the, look how clever I am.
I was too much of a meek kid for that sort of smugness of it, but I did actually do it a few times. We had a lesson on space in the last year of primary school, and the teacher was just using a book from, I'm assuming, like maybe the 1800s. I don't know. It was a very underfunded school, but like here's the solar system, as like basically going from the draw in the middle, like draw the solar system. And as we can see, Jupiter is bigger than the sun. I said, sir, yes, Dean, it's not, sir. The star's bigger. The planets go around the star because it's the biggest bit. So I was just obviously a space-loving kid, and he goes, "Oh no, Dean, see the book? See, it shows that Jupiter's bigger." They're like, sir, yes, Dean, that's a drawing, sir. It's like someone drew that. It's not actually the planets. No, Dean, come on, it's in the book. Oh, great. That's it becomes a thing.
There's the metaphor. There's the metaphor actually for what we're really discussing here is just because it's in a book and just because it's written in the way that it does, as in right now, this is that. Yeah, but Jupiter's really a problem for us in the solar system, isn't it? Yeah, we can't get rid of Jupiter. It's actually what makes the solar system, be the solar system. If we decide now, we've done this with Pluto, I'm well aware. We've taken it out, we've put it back in, we've taken it off again. I'm not sure Pluto knows where it stands at this point in time in terms of whether it's part or not.
I think astronomers are clearly the most powerful scientists, aren't they? Like, nice planet. Seeing if something were to happen to it.
Well, I'm saying this, Dean, because I actually have the solar system tattooed on my arm, and quite often the kids will count, and I watch them, and they go, "Why have you got?" And I say, "Because when I was growing up in my day, when it was better, Pluto was a planet. It exists."
I've heard so many arguments against tattoos, but that is like the most profound one I've heard. What if the solar system changes? What?
And the thing is the tattooist only did the moon against the earth, and I was like, well, you haven't done an accurate kind of representation. And he was like, do you know how long it would take to do all of the moons around? And I was like, yeah, okay. But
Jupiter
mind
has
you,
quite a
I
few.
was yeah, this is, and I'm well aware that it's getting late at night now, so I'm just thinking about astronomy and going out because it is a meteor shower this
Oh,
evening.
nice.
Yeah, we've only got, I think it's today and tomorrow whilst it's at its peak, and it's due to be cloudy in about an hour. So
Okay, cool. Keep it on
st-
with it.
where was I going? See, this is one of those things that happens with me. I've just got onto
Yeah,
a subject that I could really talk
yeah.
about, and that's not what we
Saying
signed up for.
no,
But
I'm saying Jupiter's like that example was quite a sort of little crystallization of the whole issue. Like it's in a book, it can, it must be true because it's there, and therefore, it helps me explain things. And it's not how it works. It's the reality is always
yeah,
far more complex, and simple answers invariably are wrong answers,
yeah,
if not, or if
and
not, unhelpful.
so I will reflect for people who have gotten this far in terms of the conversation. If you really want to understand the issues around tech implementation, the age assurance, why it's so difficult, do go back and have a listen to the episode I did with Andy Briarcliffe. I'm trying to think if there were other conversations. I don't think I'd discussed it with Pete, but I do spend a lot of time in this. They call it trust and safety. So we've got online safety, trust and safety, digital. I can't keep up with all of the words that we use in terms of this space. But the actual implementation of the tech is going to be really difficult to do, Dean. And again,
Mm.
it needs to be a whole parent approach. And I think what we're doing at the minute is we've got, it feels like a load of parents with pitchforks, to be perfectly honest, at the moment. We're
Yeah,
gonna get
yeah.
Shrek out of the swamp, and in doing so, what we haven't understood really are the complicated issues of, for example, blended families, separated families, children in care, children who live in residential settings. And let me tell you, in those environments, technology becomes even more complicated when you start to think about the whys and whats and numbers and spaces, and it's just a very complicated landscape. And what we're doing at the moment is taking what might be kind of a middle of the bell curve approach. Well, it's mostly these children that are affected in this particular cohort at this particular time, therefore we'll overgeneralize and then we'll have the problem solved. And the internet
Mm.
isn't going to go away from any of this.
No, no,
So
it never happens. No.
So, is there anything you would like people to know that we haven't kind of gone through in terms of your book? I will put, obviously, as people say on these podcasts, I'll put your details in the show notes along with all of the books. And
Thank you.
I would suggest that actually the two books go together as a pair
Yeah,
in
yeah, they're
terms
very
of
much interlinked in that respect. Yeah.
And yes, I know people don't do books in terms of reading them a lot, but actually maybe that's the long form type of stuff we need to take back in. I am repeatedly told people don't read because we've now got the attention of a goldfish. You don't need to come in on that, Dean, because
Hmm.
I suspect the answer is going to be no, we don't, no, we don't, no, we
That's
don't.
pretty much what I was going to go for. So yes, so, ironically, you've seen me on to say it, so people didn't lose attention.
And
So
again, that's because I tend to go off and read the research. I mean, who decided how long a goldfish attention span is when attention is such a loaded word as well?
yeah, also it's a goldfish. I mean, what's it going to pay attention to? So, yep, there's that little castle again.
It's for yeah. Well, I mean, it's don't even go there, Kath, because that could be
No.
another hour. Just rein it in. Okay. Is there anything that you think is really pressing at this point in time that you haven't said that people need to know, ought to know, can be directed to know?
Um, I think it sort of comes back to the whole impetus of the book in the first place, in that all this sort of, fear and paranoia and suspicion around phones and stuff. As with many things that affect the parent-child dynamic, it can be improved and helped by a conversation, by discussion, by an
Mhm.
interaction. Some might say it's a negotiation. Maybe that's what it is. But I do think a lot of the panic around phones is being sort of caught up in the fact that people are now raising teenagers when they weren't before. I think the shift from small child to teenager, despite Harry Enfield's ridiculous portrayal of it, is a profound one. It does lead to sort of
Yeah.
significant changes. And whereas in the past, he was blamed, oh, it's that rock and roll music, or it's like
Hmm.
Tamagotchis or something, or whatever people in the past. Video games always got blamed for it. But it is a natural process. You become a teenager, you go through a lot of stuff. The fact you've got a phone in your pocket where you didn't before, doesn't change that much. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but just because a teenager can be a bit more distant and moody doesn't mean that they're not aware of what's happening and what's going on around them. So I think phones are in front of us. They are the reality now. It's very tempting to think, oh, it'd be so much easier if they go away, or if they weren't introduced in the first place. Maybe that's true. That's not the reality we live in. That is not the world around us. They are here. They are a huge part of life now, for good and ill. And so I think we have to play the game in front of us. Okay, so kids have these phones, and involved in the discussion, because if you want to say like, I want to restrict their access, well, they won't like that. Teenagers don't like that. This is a huge part of their life, their social world, and taken away from them just because you feel uneasy about it. I think that's a recipe for disaster, personally, if you're wanting to maintain a good relationship with your child. And yeah, so make it a discussion. A discourse is there to be had. You can figure this out together. It doesn't have to be my way or the highway or fire and brimstone. And I think, but again, you personally, you're the world leading expert in raising your kid, wherever you are, listen to this, because no one else is doing it. So,
Absolutely.
It's your choice. Yes.
Yep. So one of the things I want to add in right at the end, and I know it's a comical statement, is I don't know where the parents against parents having smartphones movement is, because if these damn things are so addictive, doesn't that mean a load of adults are addicted as well? In which case, don't we have a full-on crisis of all ages, of all people using these things?
Absolutely. I mean, I go on Facebook now, they see some wild stuff on there, and it's not teenagers putting it there. Because when I did my research, I asked kids, some kids, have you got a Facebook account? It's like saying, what's your favorite gramophone record? Like, what? Why? You like the Dame Hilda Warpole? What?
You don't even know the speed of 33. I know but yeah, there is this thing about, if they're so damn addictive for children, what I'm going to reflect, if you don't have, if you haven't agreed with anything Dean and I have said all the way through this conversation, then maybe, book yourself in to see somebody, because clearly you're listening to this on a device, which means that, you really do need to take a check of your usage.
Indeed. It's the whole, this discussion wouldn't be happening without smartphones, ironically. The campaigns, like, yes, we all got together, we started a WhatsApp group for hundreds of parents.
That's not social media though, Dean. I see this all the time. We're going to give them a smartphone, but they can only have WhatsApp on it because, we're not letting them on social media.
Mm-hmm.
Right, what?
Good luck with that. Good luck.
Right. Well, thank you very much for the conversation.
No problem, Kath. Anytime.